Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the general training session for the lead convert modules that we have got scheduled for today. Before we jump in, I have had some GoToMeeting audio issues today. So they have recommended that I switch over to a mic and headset. So let's just do a quick check. Guys, let me know if you can hear me okay. You can raise your hand in the GoToWebinar panel if it's not good and it's crackly. If you just want to send me a message either via the chat or via the questions box, that will just kind of help me gauge where we are in terms of audio. I hope that this resolves it. I have been on the phone with them all afternoon, so cross our fingers. Okay, so we're getting some comments that it's good. We're going to hope that it continues. If it gets choppy at any point, let me know. I will try to adjust, but just bear with me. If it does, it's been kind of challenging. All right, so I'm showing my screen as well. I'm hoping you can see that. If you cannot see my screen, also let me know that as well. Okay, we're going to jump right in. So what we have on tap for today is to take a look at the lead conversion modules in DemandTools. So what I mean by that is over here, I'm looking at my left-hand navigation. Under the cleansing section of modules, we're going to be looking at lead to contact deduplication, lead to account deduplication, and then mass lead convert. So the majority of the training, we're going to be talking about how we can compare the lead object against both the contact object and the account object to determine if there's duplication between the two. So for lead to contact, do we have a person that exists as both a lead and a contact? Once we go through that module and we find that there is duplication there, we'll actually send that lead through the conversion process and simultaneously merge it into the existing contact, bringing over any related sub-objects of importance and all that good stuff. Same with lead to account, comparing the company information on the lead page with the account object. So we want to know, okay, do we have a lead for this person, but do we already have an account that exists as well? Again, there, when a duplicate or a match is found, that lead will be sent through the conversion process and a new contact will be created on that existing account. Okay, so we'll spend most of our time today talking about that. The last maybe 10 minutes or so, we'll take a look at mass lead convert, which is just a quick way to grab a bunch of leads and send them through the conversion process. All right. A few other kind of housekeeping things before we really dive in. Everything I say today, everything we talk about is referenced in the help documentation for these modules. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed. I don't want you to feel like you have to write down every word that comes out of my mouth. It's all there for you to go back and reference if you need to. The easiest way to access that documentation is by using these little green question marks to the left of each of these module names. So if I just click on this first one, it's going to open up the documentation in a separate window. And so you can see for lead to contact, we'll get to some step-by-step instructions. Okay, so that's all there for you to use later on. Also, from the DemandTools Today page, which is what you'll see every time you log into the tool, this first tab here, Self-Help, also takes you to some resources. From here, we have access to our knowledge base and then the home page for help documentation. Okay, so the green question mark takes you directly to that specific module. The online help system link here just is going to take you to the home page and you can navigate to the section that you need to access. An exciting thing we have coming out very, very soon is we are launching a new community page on our website, which is going to be good for idea sharing. So you guys can talk, users can talk to each other, you guys can interact with us with questions and ideas. So be on the lookout for that in the next couple of weeks, I hope. I think we're that close. So it's going to replace this knowledge base here. So everything from the knowledge base will go into this community page with a whole lot more. Okay, so just wanted to let you know that that's coming. All right, the last thing here before we dive into content, over on the far right-hand side of this screen, you have your tech support tab. If you ever have a need to open a case, you have issues or questions, this is the fastest way to reach us. Once we click into this screen, We'll see a quick web form to fill out, let us know about your org, your issues, and then we can start the troubleshooting process. If you are an NFP user, meaning you're using DemandTools under our NFP grant, unfortunately, we don't offer direct technical support to that group, but on that new community page, NFP is going to have a great section of that, so you guys can interact and we'll monitor that as well. Right now, if you go to this NFP tab here, there's a forum, I think it's still live, where you can go and ask questions as well. Okay? Back to the Today page. Lastly, I'm recording the session today, so if you would like a copy of the recording, you can shoot me an email and I'll get this converted and ready to roll as soon as we close up and send those out. I'll go ahead and put my email address in the chat window in case you want that recording. Okay. We're going to dig in now. So with this group of, really we're focusing on deduplication initially. In terms of when or where these modules come into play in terms of the grand scheme of things when you're deduping, in most cases you will have already gone into Single Table Dedupe and cleaned up these objects individually before moving on to lead to contact and lead to account. The reason that that's helpful is because that makes it so if you've already gone in and cleaned up leads and gone in and cleaned up contacts, when you get here, you'll have mostly a one-to-one match. So you'll be matching one lead to one contact, and it takes some of the extra guesswork in deciding which one you want to merge into out of it. Now, is it going to totally break your process if you have a dire need to come in and dedupe leads to contacts first? No. I think it all kind of comes out in the wash at the end of the day anyway. So if you do need to come in here and this is a real need that needs to be addressed, it's not going to hurt anything to start with lead to contact or lead to account. But again, the recommendation is to clean up accounts, contacts, and leads first, and then move on to your cross-object dedupers. Okay, so now that we've said that, let's start with our lead to contact module. And again, the premises of this module is to compare the lead object against the contact object for the purpose of determining if there is duplication there. So we're going to walk through three different steps or three separate steps as part of this module. Step one, which we're looking at now, we're going to tell it what leads we want to compare to what contacts. So this is where we're going to perform any necessary segmentation. When we get to step two, that's where we're going to define our criteria, tell it what fields we want to match on, what mapping types we want to use, and then step three will be our results grid. If you're using Single Table Dedupe or you have at least gone through that training, some of this is going to look familiar. It really is very similar steps, just in slightly different places. So it makes it look different enough that it almost looks brand new, where you'll start to recognize some of this quickly if you've deduped at all in the past. Another difference between Single Table Dedupe and these lead convert modules is that we do not have pre-built scenarios available for use with these modules. So we're going to walk through creating a scenario from scratch here, okay? If you have someone else in your org who has created scenarios, you can go ahead and load these. And once you walk through and create your scenarios, you will want to save them so that you don't have to recreate or reinvent the wheel each time. Okay, let's dig in. Again, step one here, this is simply where we tell it what leads we want to compare to what contacts. And kind of a common theme throughout these modules today is since we're working with two objects, we have to do everything twice. So you see here at the top of the page, I've got my conditions box where I select the leads I want to download and compare. And then at the bottom, contacts I want to download and compare. The way that my screen looks right now, over on the right, I have use all selected for leads and contacts. So if your intention is to compare all leads to all contacts, then you can just leave this screen exactly as it is when you come in. The default is to look at everything. If you don't want to look at everything and you do need to segment, that's when you're going to toggle to use conditions. for both in most cases. And I had already started practicing or setting us up an example today. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use conditions to tell it specifically what leads and contacts we want to look at. So in writing conditions, I'm just going to use the field, operator, and value that I would want to base my conditions on. And today we're just going to do a really basic geographic segmentation. I'm going to just look at records in the state of Arizona. So my field that I'm going to select is going to be state. My operator in this case is going to be equals. You do have other operators. You'll notice that your operators change depending on what field type you've selected. So this is my list of operators for a text field. If I were to toggle to, let's say, a date time field, I'd have my date time operators. Or if I based it off of an ID, like a user ID, I would just see equals and does not equals. We're going to stick with equals though, and then my value in my value box is going to be Arizona. Make sure I spell it right. And then because in my org, my states are not standardized, I do need to include a second value here to represent those states that might have the 2-character abbreviation. So I'm just going to add a comma, no space, and then my second value. And that comma, no space is what you're going to use anytime you're conditioning off of a text field and you need to include multiple values in your value box. And once you have that set up, you can just add that to your set of conditions here. So now we've told it to only look at leads in the state of Arizona or AZ. So we want to now do the same thing for contacts. This time it's going to be mailing state, operator equals, and then I'm just going to cheat a little bit and copy and paste that value from the top to make sure I'm looking at the same thing. Arizona, I did spell it right. It's really small sometimes. I have to make sure I got that I in there. And then add that, add that to my list. I did add it twice. I must have clicked really fast. Anytime you need to remove a condition, and I like to call this your DemandTools initiation if you're a super new user, you're going to try to right-click to remove from a list like this in the tool, but you do have to highlight the entire row and then hit delete on your keyboard, and that will delete it. Okay, so step one, again, pretty easy and may not be necessary for everyone. Again, if you need to look at all your records, you don't have to do anything here. So now we're going to advance into step two. Whoops. My mouse is super sensitive. Okay, now that we're in step two, this is where if you have used Single Table Dedupe, some of this is going to start to look familiar. At the top of the screen, this is where we're going to define our criteria, meaning we're going to tell it which field on the lead page we want to compare to which field on the contact page. All right, and we're going to do that by adding what are called mapping conditions. The second part of this page, down at the bottom, is simply where we choose the fields that we want to see on our results grid. Okay, so if we can verify our results and our conditions and really take a good look and make sure that the duplicates returned are really duplicates. So let's build out some criteria first. With deduplication in DemandTools, and I think with any tool you use, in most cases you're going to run several different scenarios in each module, meaning it's very rare that you're going to pull back all of your duplicates by just looking at your data with one set of criteria. So what we recommend is for your first or your initial scenario to be fairly rigid. And by rigid, I mean we're going to match on the most amount of fields using some of our stricter mapping types so that we'll have a very high level of confidence that the records returned are really duplicates. And then once we get that kind of low-hanging fruit cleaned up, then we might come back with a second scenario where we loosen up a little bit. So what I mean by that is, in this first scenario, we might say, okay, let's compare first name, last name, company, street address, city, phone. That's a lot of fields. That's 6 fields we're going to match on, 6 data points. And we clean up those duplicates, And then in our second run, we might scale back a little bit and just look at first name, last name, company, street address, maybe take phone off. Okay, and so you'll kind of have to set up what that progression looks like for your org because everyone's data is a little bit different. So we're going to just talk about some strategies for how you might do that now. All right, so just the basic steps of adding a mapping condition. We're just going to click on this Add Mapping Condition button on the left-hand side, kind of towards the middle. And that's going to give me a row here up in my criteria. And I'm just going to use this drop down in column 1 to choose the lead field. And we'll start with first name. And then just to the right of that, I'm going to select the contact field that I want to match to. So in this case, it's going to be first name. Now, another piece of this that's really important that we're going to get to more in depth in just a second is the concept of mapping types. So in DemandTools, anytime we're matching fields together, by default, it defaults to an exact mapping type, meaning the data in both fields would have to be exactly the same in order to be returned as a duplicate. And we all know from working with Salesforce data that very rarely is data the exact same in two different fields, right? So what we have available are mapping types that allow for matching data together in ways other than exact. So there's different types of mapping types for different fields that we're using. So we'll spend a few minutes after we get all of our mapping conditions set up talking about what mapping types we can use for what fields to better match our records together and be able to find more duplicates. Okay, so we've got our first name selected. Now we're going to go back and add our second mapping condition, and this is going to be last name. So last name on the lead to last name on the contact. Now I'm going to move on to, what do we say, company. So company name on the lead, and then account name on the contact. And anytime you need to get to account fields, you're going to drill into the account object by using this little plus sign next to the word account. And now I can see and match on my account fields. And we're just going to scroll down and look for name. Okay, we're going to move on to street address on the lead, and then mailing street on the contact. And then the last one we'll do is city on the lead to mailing city on the contact. So this is what, when you talk about a rigid scenario, this is pretty rigid, okay? Because in order to be seen as a dupe, records would have to match on all 5 of these fields, okay, based on the mapping types that we're getting ready to apply. Now, what's a rigid scenario to your org versus my org can be very different. You know, sometimes just first name, last name, company can be rigid depending on your data. Also, a fair amount of orgs, when using lead to contact, their first scenario might just be an exact match on email. Since email in a lot of cases is a unique identifier, that's an easy way to do kind of an initial sweep, and it can be considered a rigid scenario even though you're just matching on one field. Okay, now that we've got our field selected, we're going to go over and take a look at mapping types. And if you have been using Single Table Dedupe, this might be a little bit of a review, okay? So just hang with me for a couple of seconds. If you have no experience or haven't been exposed to mapping types at all, there is a lot more information in the help docs, okay? So everything we're getting ready to talk about is documented vocabulary-wise and gives you some examples there. And I'll pop that document up in a second in the chat window so you can access it later if you need to. Okay, so mapping types, just to recap, this is how we are able to match field data together that's similar but may not be exactly the same. So if you have 2 account names, CRM Fusion Incorporated versus CRM Fusion Inc. If we were using an exact mapping type, those would not be seen as duplicates, okay? Because Inc. and Incorporated are different. So some of these mapping types allow for those types of variations that we commonly see in data. This drop down here in each of the rows that you added gives you your comprehensive list of mapping types that you have access to. For first name, if we scroll down, we'll see a first name mapping type. And what this does is it references a nickname list. And this nickname list is visible from this screen. So if you just go over to the left-hand side, you have the ability to view and edit this nickname list. So if you have maybe Rebecca Smith as a lead and Becca Smith as a contact and everything else matches, the only difference is one record has her nickname, then this table would see, if we go find Rebecca, I think it's under Becca, Becca and Rebecca as the same thing, okay? And you can add to this list as well if you need to. Now, first name is a good mapping type on a rigid scenario, but there might be instances where maybe middle initial or middle name are incorporated in your first name field, and that can trip up your matching sometimes. So we have another mapping type called first XX words and first XX letters. So those can be strategies for loosening a scenario if you do run into data challenges like that. If I selected first XX words, now I get to choose how many words in that field it's looking at. So if I put 1, it's only going to look at the first word in that field. So now if I have middle initials or middle names in that field, it's going to ignore them because it's not looking at anything to the right of that first field, first word. All right, we're going to pop it back to first name for now. For last name, I'm going to leave it at exact. Again, that strategy of first XX words can help if you have suffixes or anything else included in that last name field for some reason. Moving down to company account name, this is a big one. This is where we start to see some big variations occasionally. The go-to mapping type for a rigid scenario on account name is this cleaned account name mapping type. And what this mapping type does is it basically is going to take your account name through almost a 3-step cleansing process. Now, when I say cleansing, it's not making any physical changes to your account names for any reason, but just in how DemandTools is going to view that data when it's trying to match values together. This is another list that we are able to view and make changes to if we need to. So if we look over in the upper left-hand corner again, to the left of my nickname list, I have this account cleaning list. And if I pop this open, you can see here the 3 tabs at the top, replace, suffix removal, prefix removal. That represents that 3-step process. And so basically what this is doing starts here with the replace tab. And when it's looking at your account names, anytime it sees a value over here on the left, it's going to view it as the value on the right. Okay? So things like abbreviations or ampersand. You know, if you have AT&T on the lead with the ampersand, but then your account is AT&T with the word and spelled out. If you were matching on an exact basis, those wouldn't be seen as matches. But now that we're referencing this account cleaning list, those would be seen as matches. What you want to do with this list is add to it. Bulkify it if you can. Out of the box, it does not contain much. So when DemandTools is downloaded, you'll have everything from this blue line up in your replace list. Everything else I've added. So if you've got common abbreviations that show up over and over again in your data, you want to make sure you come and add to this list. It just makes the mapping type work better for your individual data set. Okay. Suffix removal, this is that suffix scrub that we talked about, inc versus incorporated. Anytime one of these words is seen at the end of the account name, it's ignored and not analyzed, okay? And you can add to this list as well. And then the last here, prefix removal, this is for words at the beginning of the account name. If it's referenced here and it's at the beginning of the account name, it's just going to be ignored and not analyzed. And then sometimes this list is used in fields other than account name. I had an org recently in the last name field. They had the word doctor in front of every contact. They were in the healthcare industry, and that was a huge kind of data challenge when they were trying to dedupe. So workaround, they added doctor to their prefix list here, and they used the cleaned account name mapping type on the last name field. So that prefix was ignored, and then it just matched on the last name. Okay, so little things like that. Once you get used to the mapping types, you'll start your wheels will start turning and how to kind of make this work, little workarounds to make it work better for your data. Okay, the next two, and these are the last two that we'll really go in depth on, street addresses. So street addresses, quite possibly the hardest field to match on, just because there are so many different ways to write one street address, and then times that times the thousands of records in your org, and it becomes slightly nightmarish. But we do have two mapping types that are specifically designed to help match street addresses together. The first one that we'll talk about is called street address match. And this option is the more rigid of the two. Okay, and when I say rigid, it truly is, it's pretty rigid. It allows for common variations that we see in street addresses, but it still wants all of the same elements to be there. Okay, so if you've got a directional symbol like south or west on one, then you've got to have that on the other. If you've got a suite number on one, you've got to have the same suite number on the other. Suite can be abbreviated on one and not on the other, but all the same information's got to be there. So it's pretty strict. The less rigid option for street addresses, and probably the more commonly used, is this relaxed address match, because it gives you a lot more wiggle room. Okay, with a relaxed address match, it's just going to parse out the street number and the street name. And hopefully we'll see some good examples when we get into our results grid. But if I had 115 South Main Street, Suite 6, building floor, P.O. Box 145, and then 115 Main Street, the root of both of those is just 115 Main. So they would still be seen as matches despite all of that noise in that first address. Again, we'll point out some examples of all of these mapping types working when we get into our results grid. All right, so other than that, you do have some other mapping types here for things like zip codes. Zip 5 and 9 matches the 5-digit zip to those that might have the 4-digit extension. On the phone numbers, you've got a numeric match. Okay, this is going to ignore the formatting, just match on the numbers in the field. And then you've got a relaxed phone match that just matches on the local numbers. It's going to ignore the area code and any extension information and just look at that 7-digit local number. The NA in the name for that phone match is North American, and that's your trigger to only run that on North American records. You don't want to use this on international phone numbers. So you've got state matches and country matches. There's a lot of options to choose from. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull up a mapping type document in the help docs, and I'm going to put that in the chat window for you. And that's something you might want to bookmark to look at a little bit later, but it's just to show you an example. We went through cleaned account name. Here's where you can kind of read about it and see more of a visual if you want to. We have talked about possibly having an entire class on mapping types, just because you could very easily spend an hour just talking on mapping types. Okay, so now we've got our field set up. We know what we want to match on. We've got our mapping types applied. We have these additional mapping types over to the far right to loosen up the mapping type you've selected a little bit more if you wanted to. Your fuzzy option is just to catch spelling errors in your data. Transpose looks at the words in the field, but not the order that they're in. So if you had on your lead, the company was Salesforce Foundation, and then the account was inverted Foundation Salesforce, those would be seen as matches, despite the fact that the word order was a little different. And then the last one, Alpha Clean, just looks at the letters and the numbers in the field. So it's going to scrub off and ignore any additional formatting that you might have. Okay? So again, this is a rigid scenario. In subsequent passes or subsequent scenarios, you might remove some of the fields that you're matching on or loosen up your mapping types. Those are both strategies for loosening a scenario. Now that we've got that all defined, the last thing we have to do before we look at our results is just going to be to choose those fields that we want to see in our results grid. And again, we have to do it twice. We have to choose the lead fields over here on the left and the contact fields on the right. So I'm just going to choose these fields that we're matching on for this example. So we'll do first name, last name, and I'm able to kind of jump around my list here by just hitting the first letter in the field that I'm looking for. And it's just an easier way without having to scroll too much. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing over here on contacts. Account name. Remember, to get to my account fields, I've got to drill in. And anytime I open up a table join, I always try to remember to close it, because if not, you can start getting your wires crossed. Billing, oh, mailing street. And then mailing city. Okay, so we're good. All right, we've done with step 2. We've got everything set up. Any questions on matching or mapping types, feel free to ask. So if we're going to have a bunch of questions, that's typically where it is. But again, it differs a lot from org to org. So this works for our org, but again, it might be way too rigid for your org. And really, it might be way too rigid for my org. We'll see what we get, and we might have to come back and loosen up again. Okay, so I'm just going to use my little navigation down here at the bottom and go into my results grid, and you'll kind of see it looking, downloading leads and contacts, and then it'll do that comparison. It can take a little bit of time depending on how many records you're looking at. Okay, so if you've got, I don't know, 1 million records in your org, maybe 500,000 leads, 500,000 contacts, it might take some time for that comparison to happen. Okay, so our results grid has loaded, and it's a little bit sad. There's not a lot here. So typically when your list is smaller than you thought it would be, that's a good indication that your scenario is too rigid. So we might immediately go back to step 2 and loosen things up. Actually, let's do that. I'm going to take off street address. That's probably where my issues are. And let's see if that makes a difference. It might not. Oh, a little bit. Not too much. Okay, so now that we're in a little bit more respectable of a results grid, the first place I always want to look when I get into my grid is down at the bottom right here, kind of little left of center. It tells me how many leads match to how many contacts. Okay, and that's typically my gut check that my scenario, I'm kind of on track in terms of rigidness. I'm matching on the right fields. This is a good grid. What you see initially here in yellow are my leads. If I expand using these plus signs to the left, then I will see the matching contact. Now, this first example is exactly what I'm talking about when we talked about going in and merging contacts and leads first, so you get that one-to-one match. What I've got here is I've matched one lead to more than 10 contacts, it looks like. So if I had already gone in and deduped contacts first, I would not have this. Those would have already been cleaned up. When this does happen, okay, if you do need to come in here first and clean up leads and contacts before your initial dedupes of those objects individually, you see up over at the top of your control bar over here, This default contact selection is where you tell it which contact you want to merge into in the event that there's more than one. Okay, so you're a little bit limited in your options here. So you can choose from the oldest contact, the newest contact, or the last modified contact. Now I'm going to go ahead and check everything in this grid. When I do that and I make my selection here, I just click Update Check Leads, and then it's going to check the box over here of the lead that matches my criteria. Let's see what the oldest is. Okay, so that was the oldest, that was the newest, and the last modified, I think. So this is the record it's going to merge into. If you want to expand your whole grid, you can do that. Down here, I'm kind of jumping around on you guys now. Bottom left-hand corner, I can expand everything and get a good look. That makes my eyes kind of go crazy, so I tend to do it one by one, but again, it's completely up to you. And then I can collapse everything again if I need to. Other than that, you only have a few other things you have to tweak on your conversion settings over here. First, you do have to set a lead status for all of these. This is going to match whatever your lead statuses are in Salesforce. A lot of orgs, when they're deduping using DemandTools, will add a lead status indicating that it was converted because it was a dupe. Just so if you're reporting on that lead status field and you set everything at qualified, it might skew some of your results. So just a little tip there. You have the ability to overwrite lead source on the matching contact if you want to. That is the only field that you can choose to overwrite. Okay, so because we're using the Salesforce conversion code, the contact data wins unless a field is blank for some reason, with the exception of lead source. We can overwrite lead source. And then lastly, we can create an opportunity if we want to, and we can create a task for the contact owner, just kind of letting them know what happened. All right, so let's just go through and convert a few of these. We won't do the whole grid. I'm just going to check the boxes of 3 here in the middle and then come down to the bottom and choose Convert Checked. Once we click that, we get this pop-up, and it's an important one. It tells us that no restore file is created. So once the conversion happens, there's no going back, okay? Just like when you convert in Salesforce. I'm going to click Yes, and then you'll kind of see it walking through the process here. Once this processes, we're going to get a little status box that pops up and look at our log file if we had any errors. My GoToMeeting slows things down sometimes, so typically it happens a little bit faster than this. All right, there we go. So this is our status box that lets us know that the job was complete, and when we see that there's 0 errors, that's what we want to see. If you did have errors here, you want to drill into this hyperlink. This is your log file. This is just a running log of everything that's happened in DemandTools on a given day. So we open this up. The most recent job, so the current job is going to be the very last thing in this log. So if we scroll down to here, we see my log file. Okay. So that is your lead to contact module. Once you get done and you click out of that screen, it takes you back to step 1. So you can start the process over again. When you create a scenario that you like, you have your save scenario option here so that you can load it up, save it, load it up next time so you don't have to recreate each time. All right, so we've finished with the first module. Now we're going to take a look at lead to account. And the good news is lead to account and lead to contact are very, very similar. Minus a few little extras in the results grid, there's not a whole lot of differences other than the fields that we're matching on and then kind of what the end result is. So we're going to just navigate back to our Today page. And then I'm going to go down to our next module, lead to account. With lead to account, same concept applies. We're comparing the lead object to the account object. This time, though, we're focusing more on the company information on that lead, not so much a first name, last name, email. Okay, just company. If the street address relates to the company, we might include that information as well. Because what we're doing here, when we find a match on that company information, so we find that there's an existing account that's there, it's going to take that lead, send it through the conversion process, and then create a new contact on that existing account. Okay, so the setup here, exactly the same. Step 1, this is where we're going to condition and do any necessary segmenting. Step 2, set up our criteria. Step 3, results grid. So what we'll do here is I'm going to toggle to use conditions for both of these. And we're only going to look at records that are owned by me for this example. So we're going to do owner equals Ashley and add that condition. And I was busted again, setting things up in advance. Owner equals Ashley, the bottom, and add that condition. All right, so again, if you wanted it to look at everything, you would just toggle back to use all for these. Okay, so when we go into step 2 in lead to account, typically our list of fields that we're matching on is a little bit shorter because again, we're just focusing on company information here. So I'm going to add my mapping condition. And this time I'm going to add company name on my lead and account name on my account. And you might add phone number, you might add street address. In our org, I just want to add company and city. So I'm going to go ahead and just add city and billing city. And then I have to remember to change my mapping types too. Remember, because it always is going to default to exact, and that can cause things not to be matched. Okay, that looks good. And that's all I'm going to do for this one. It's super easy. So then at the bottom of the screen, again, we're getting repetitive now. I'm going to choose the fields I want to see on my results grid. So I'm going to choose company and city. Oh, they're right there together. Makes it easy. And then account name and billing city. Okay? And that's it. That's all I need to do. You know, you might want to see first name, last name, email on the lead. If you wanted to, it's up to you. For my org, I don't really need to see anything else. So I'm going to go ahead into my results grid and see if we get any good results. All right. So again, I tend to always look down at the bottom here to tell me how many leads match to how many accounts, and that gives me my gauge as to if I'm on par with my matching, and I'm pretty happy with this. And then I would start to drill into some of these, and I see, again, we got a lot of duplicates. So I've got one lead that matched to many accounts here, and your same rules apply. So if you match one lead to several accounts, we're on accounts now, then you have your default account selection. But again, your options are oldest, newest, and last modified. And if I want to look at my whole grid, we can see we train on deduplication, so we have a lot of intentional duplicates in our org. All right. Now that we have kind of taken a look at our grid, again, the same settings that we saw in lead to contact, but a few additional here. We still have to identify a lead status or set a lead status. So I'm going to go ahead and just change that to dupe again. I have the ability to create an opportunity if I want to, and then my task information is still here. The different option or setting that we have here is because of the fact that a new record is being created, a new contact is being created, we do have to designate ownership of that record. And we're going to do that right here. We're going to choose whether we want it to be the account owner, the lead owner, or we can choose from any of our active users in Salesforce using this drop down here. I'm just going to choose account owner. And then let's collapse everything. And then I would come in here and process a few of these. So we'll just grab a few and do convert. Again, no restore file. So once these leads are converted and that contact is created, there's no magic undo. So we're going to click yes. Once this processes, I do want to show you a neat trick with another mapping type. I know you thought, just when I thought she was done with mapping types. There's a mapping type called relaxed domain, and it really can come in handy in this lead to account module if you're using the website field, if you have a high usage rate on website field, because what it can allow is it can allow for matching an email address to a website. So with email address, it's just going to look at the domain, and then in the website, it's just going to look at everything between the www. And the .com.org.gov. So it almost creates kind of a unique identifier based on the domain for the company that you're trying to match with. So we're going to take a look at that next. There's a few caveats that apply that we'll talk about, but in most cases, it can be good. Okay, so we finished up that job. It's complete. There were 0 errors, and again, you get your log file here. Okay, so if we wanted to set up that email to website match, here's what it would look like. It's pretty simple. Whoops, I'm telling you, my mouse is super sensitive today. All right, so I'm going to get rid of both of these mapping conditions, and I'm just going to add one. And we're going to match the email field to the website field on my account. And my mapping type here is going to be relaxed domain. Okay, so it's looking at everything to the right of the @ symbol and the email address, and then between the www and the .org.gov.com and the website. Now, if you're doing this, you might want to add some conditions in the beginning in step 1 to not look at email addresses that are like Hotmail, Gmail, AOL. What is going on? Try that again, because that can cause some things to mismatch, right? If you had a, I don't know, an AOL email address and for some reason the website was AOL, I don't know if that would ever happen. But so what we see here, if we expand, oh, I didn't bring email field or website. That will help. Email, website. Now we're going to take a look again. And when we expand, right here, this top one, 3C. So we have, oh, that's not good. His email address is the website. Here's a better example. Access point. Email address, kjefferson@accesspoint.com. Account, website is accesspoint.com. So, you know, it kind of becomes a unique identifier there. Just a little trick, something to think about. May not work for your org, but again, if you're using website fields, you might want to look into it. All right, so now that's lead to account. At this point, this is kind of where we take that hard right turn and move into the mass lead convert module. So if you have any questions specific to anything we've talked about up until this point, you might want to go ahead and ask those now. We'll have time at the end as well, so if you want to save it for then, that's perfectly fine too. Again, this is one of those modules where we don't typically get a ton of questions. So, all right. I'm going to clear out of this, and we're going to go back to the DemandTools Today page, and we're going to hit our last module here. And when I say it only takes 5 or 10 minutes, it truly only takes 5 or 10 minutes. It's a very quick module to walk through. It is very, very different from what we've talked about up until now, though. Mass Lead Convert, even though it's under the cleansing group of modules, is not a deduplication module. What Mass Lead Convert does is it allows you to grab a group of leads using conditions and then send them through the conversion process. When it does that, it's not checking to see if the contact of the account already exists. Okay, so for every new lead converted, a new contact and new account is going to be created. All right, so this module, Mass Lead Convert, could potentially put duplicates into your org. I always say, this is what I like to recommend. If you ever think you want to use Math Lead Convert, click on that little green question mark and just read through the synopsis real quick just to make sure you're remembering right what it does, okay? But outside of that, actually setting this up is super easy. It's just one screen, okay? Don't have 3 screens this time. The top, we're just writing conditions, telling it which records we want to convert, and then we've got our kind of basic convert settings that we've seen already. So I'm going to not use all. That would convert all of my leads. Just toggle to use conditions. And I'm going to say let's convert all leads that were created this week. So created date, operator this week, and add that condition. Now that I've done that, I come down here to my basic convert settings. I have to set a lead status. I can choose if I want to create an opportunity. And now I have to designate who the owner of these records is going to be. Once that lead's converted, do I want the lead owner to be the owner, or do I want another user in Salesforce to be the owner? And then lastly, you've got some notification options here. If you want to send an email to the new contact owner or create a task, you can do that as well. With Math Lead Convert, you do not get to see a list of the records or the leads that are being converted before you hit convert or after you hit convert. So when I use this as an admin, I always would go either into Power Grid or Mass Effect first, write my conditions there, export just to look, make sure that I'm writing my conditions right and it's pulling back the records that I want to convert, and that was just kind of my gut check. Here, when I come down and hit convert leads, it's going to go through and then it's going to give me a pop-up that tells me how many leads it's converting. In this case, it's 0. But then I'll know that that number matches what was in that export that I performed. And that, again, maybe that's just me. I get nervous about doing things that can't be undone. So anytime I can check and double check, I do. But just know that you don't get to see the records here. And there is no restore file that's created. We didn't have any that met our criteria, so we will hit yes, and it'll tell us that it's complete because there was nothing to convert. But again, a super easy module. If you ever just have the need to convert a bunch of leads, this is going to be the place to go. Okay? All right. As soon as I started Math Lead Convert, I had a question come in about the first module. So Christopher, I am sorry, but we're going to answer that one now. So Christopher's question is, the order is always lead to contact and then lead to account. So that only creates new contact at the last step. So that is the recommended order, to start with lead to contact and then go lead to account. Again, if you have a need to go outside of that order or something different, you can, but that's definitely what's recommended, yes. So that last step is the one that creates the new records. And that again would be after you'd already gone in and deduped leads, contacts, and accounts as well. Okay, well, we have covered all of the topics that we set out to talk about today. I am going to hang out. If you guys have more questions, feel free to ask. If you would like a copy of the recording, we had some folks join a couple minutes after we started, so I'm going to put my email address in the chat window one more time. And you can just shoot me an email, and I will get those out to you. It takes it a little while to convert, but I should be able to get those out today. But yeah, I appreciate everybody signing up and sitting in on our training today. If you have questions, let me know. I'm just going to navigate back to the training page so you can kind of see what's on tap for the rest of the week, the rest of the month. And yeah, thanks so much. And I'm here for questions if anything pops into your mind. Appreciate it. Have a great one.